All right. Welcome to the Spring Office Hours podcast, episode 42, titled Virtual Threads. I'm your host, Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at VMware. Alongside me, as always, is my friend and coworker, DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how are you doing today?
I'm here. Things are great. Uh, that's all I can say. Just things are moving in the right direction. It's a great time to be a Spring developer.
It really is. We have a lot to get to today. We got a lot. We have some show notes here that we use. We have a lot to talk about today. I think one thing I want to address before we kind of jump into the show today is I've gotten a question. Hey, I'm looking for the live stream of this podcast. Where is it? The reason I'm getting this question a lot is because we used to broadcast this live stream to like 20 different channels, right?
And it was so much
Like we
fun.
were we were on so many platforms and so many different channels. And so it was easier to find us, but it was also confusing, right? Because you never really understood where to tell people to go. So right now we are broadcasting this on YouTube to the Spring Developer YouTube channel, which you can find at Spring Source Dev. So just look for Spring Developer. You can find it. Follow that YouTube channel. This is where we put all of our kind of Spring content. This is the show, and that is being broadcast to that channel. So you could find the archives there, but you can also find the archives over at springofficehours.io if you're interested.
Hello, Gennady, Anbu, Solitary Turian, and a new from Istanbul. I think it's new, or I think they are new. Mikhail from Istanbul. Welcome to the show.
Cool. So what have you been up to, DaShaun? We actually, the last couple of weeks we weren't on. We had to skip last week because we were both tied up. And then 2 weeks ago, the great Nate Shuda stepped in for you as you were on vacation. So it's been a little while. What's been going
Yeah,
on with you?
I'm playing with this thing called Kubernetes.
Oh, heard of it.
So I'm
Yep.
doing a lot of Spring, and
It's
I'm
going to be
pulling.
big, I hear.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 different Kubernetes clusters in my home lab that I'm just playing around, and I'm running Spring on. I did a stream with Mark Fines last week on
Nice.
GitOps with Tap. So just kind of, yeah, different ways that we can deploy Kubernetes, different ways that we can run Spring workloads on them. So yeah, I'm dibble dabbling a little bit, and then I've been doing a lot of Spring Shell. So I have my handful of Spring Shell projects that I've been doing. I like it because I understand Spring. I don't have to do Bash anymore. So I have the one that I use for my initializer plus plus, I call it, for
Yep.
projects that I do out of start.spring.io. I also have one that I use for the show, my Spring Office Hours helper that
Yep.
does some of the things that we do to get ready for the show. And it's just been fun taking the latest and greatest. And then on top of that, I'm working with Mark Pollock on the new experimental project called Spring CLI. So
Cool.
lots of stuff. I've been very active and having lots of fun.
For those who don't know about the Spring Seal, I actually had a chance to sit down probably sometime last year with Mark and talk about this project. Do you want to just kind of give it a high level overview, what it is, and maybe where it's at as far as the ecosystem goes?
There's so much to it. The Spring ecosystem is massive,
Hmm.
and that's a Spring Shell program. But the idea is it's going to be a tool that we can use to help in and around all of our Spring projects. So some of the things are how to create a new project, how to add a dependency from the CLI. So instead of doing the go to start.spring.io, do the generator and explore it and copy the
Copy it.
block that I need, we could do those things from the CLI. And then
Yeah.
if uh, you know, we have these Spring Cloud Gateway, for example, or Spring Cloud Data Flow, some of these products where you might have some features that get added to add a filter, add a route, and have it automatically update your configuration. Or another
Kind of
thing,
like a recipe, right?
yeah,
Hey,
it's got these recipes. Oh, that's
yeah,
another thing that it can actually run open rewrite recipes.
nice.
So yeah, there's a lot. It's still trying to figure
Yeah.
out, what it's going to be when it grows up. It's still experimental, but there's so much there right now. It's a really fun project.
So from what I remember of it and the things that I've kind of gone through with it, you could think of like start.spring.io as a way to bootstrap an application. that is really not about code generation. That is giving you a starting point in your Spring journey. Whereas the Spring CLI, if done right and we can add stuff to it and we have all these templates and recipes, this is really about like the next step and how to generate maybe say some code for like a REST API or a GraphQL API, or like you said, from the JavaScript world, hey, I want to add this dependency, I npm install dependency, whatever that is. Those are the types of problems it's trying to solve, correct?
Yeah. So if you're familiar with Spring IO and the docs, you might be familiar with some of the getting started guides.
Yep.
So one of the features that it has available now is this way of not just generating a project, but also generating a project with some getting started context.
Yep.
So you actually have a working example, not just the frame and the dependencies, but an
Mhm.
actual working endpoint, for example, for a Spring MVC app.
Yeah, so I could see that being used for beginners for like, hey, I wanna kick up a REST API, but also inside of organizations, like, hey, we build a lot of the same apps that kind of look like this, and that they're not just starting; they have like all of these dependencies and all of these configurations that they might follow some kind of guide, right?
We have this app accelerator concept, but
Yep.
which was
Oh,
also
right, right.
kind of
Yep.
created by Mark Pollock.
Yep.
But my head's been racing around this topic. The idea, I'll take a step back. The initializer, start.spring.io, you can go and fork that project. And you can use it however you want. You can put in your own dependencies. You can have your
Yep.
own maps. You can put your own versions. You can add stuff to it, etc. Uh, I was doing that for a long time. I worked with customers that were doing that, but that's where my initializer plus plus came from. There was a
Yep.
handful of things that I was doing regularly that I didn't want to fork the initializer project in order to get done.
Hmm.
So I used this CLI and Spring Shell and the native image made it so I could have this kind of first class experience. Well, now the Spring ecosystem is pretty massive.
Yeah.
There's some first class participants in the ecosystem that are actually managed outside of the Spring team. So one of the other things that the Spring CLI is doing is it opens itself up to other projects being able to integrate. So I could say, hey, Spring CLI, I would like to add some support for that third party project.
Yep.
And that third party project provides their getting started, their catalog of recipes. And I
That's
can
awesome.
use their recipes, all part of this kind of first class experience,
Yep.
a way to expand and open up. And there's other frameworks and other projects that have similar experiences.
Yep.
And this one is just kind of finding which ones we're going to use, which ones we're going to adopt. But it's really exciting.
Cool. Love it. We got a comment here. It says CLI is love.
Yes.
That's true. I love working with CLIs because again, it goes back to, I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I got into like programming is just being able to like build stuff for myself. Like I need to automate this thing, and I could just build something for myself, and that is truly like for it could be for others, but like, hey, this is a thing that runs on my computer and does what I tell it to do. So yeah, awesome
That's a
stuff.
big part.
Yep.
Yesterday and Friday, I spent quite a bit of time on this helper for our show. Just the
Mhm.
idea, like, hey, it's not complex, but it's done, and I made this. And
Yeah.
as I was doing that, I got to explore. I got to grab the latest versions of the other projects. I spent time reading the documentation, reading the release notes and the change logs for all these projects that have been released over the last few weeks. And that's
Mhm.
just exciting. I get
Yep.
excited over those kind of things.
Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on this week and next week. I want to start with actually last week. So I was in Pittsburgh last week. Had some fun in Pittsburgh. Was there for just a kind of short trip. I was able to have dinner with Cora and our boss Tasha, which was really great at this really great Japanese restaurant. They had some really fancy rolls there. I can't remember the name of it now. I wish I did, but
It's
that
called
was a really
sushi.
good time. I was
Sushi.
there. Yeah, it was sushi. It was
It's
like
called
hand
sushi.
rolls, though. What is it?
It's called sushi.
No, no, sushi. I remember, just not the name of the place. But I was in town for two really exciting events. One was I gave a talk at FedEx Ground. Their headquarters is there in Pittsburgh, and I gave a talk on Spring Boot 3 and beyond. So this was a lot of fun. We talked about like all the new things in Spring Boot 3, 3.1, and guess what's coming in 3.2. So we talked about a lot about something that we're going to talk later today on Project Loom and virtual threads. One of the things that came out of that, though, which was interesting, was I got a lot of really good feedback on HTTP interface clients. So I got some good questions on that, which prompted me to create a video yesterday. So I created actually two. One is up right now. One is on, hey, if I'm using an HTTP interface, how do I send headers along with the requests? So I showed an example of how to send a header through one request or through like every single request. And then what I decided to do is I put together a video on like, hey, let's build out a full CRUD REST API in one service, then create another service and call each of those methods using that interface client. Because I think a lot of the examples that I've done and that I see in the community are just like one or two of the methods. I wanted to see like a full CRUD example of it. So I put that together. So that should be coming out soon. Then the next day we had a booth at PNC Developer Days. So PNC has their own developer conference, which is awesome to see. If you check out my newsletter, you can see some pictures from there. But they rented out the space in the what was it? The Playhouse. It was the Pittsburgh Playhouse. It was really cool there. They had a ton of developers there. They said anywhere from 800 to 1,000 in person. Then they had a whole bunch offsite, like on Zoom or virtually. But we had a booth there, and it was a chance to kind of talk to everybody at PNC about what VMware Tanzu does. Some of our offerings, like Taz. Cora was giving some really amazing demos on Taz, showing how that works. And I got a chance to talk to, there were a lot of interns there. So a lot of younger developers, just kind of very first job, didn't know a whole lot about Spring or Tanzu. So they asked a lot of questions about Spring. And I thought that was interesting because I'm used to getting like beginner questions, but these were like even before beginner questions. So I had a lot of fun talking to people about like what Spring is, and how it might benefit them in their career. So that was cool. So yeah, having a lot of fun on the road. We're continuing the road show next week in your neck of the woods. What are we doing next week?
Next week is KCDC, the Kansas City Developers Conference.
Oh,
That's
that's
going to
gonna
be
be fun.
exciting. We're doing a
Well,
workshop.
yeah. So we're doing a workshop, getting started with Spring. This is the kind of second iteration of this particular workshop that we're doing. We learned a lot from the first one, as we were talking about before the show. We have some good plans to kind of revamp that and kind of fix some things that we weren't happy with last time.
Here's the thing. That was 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Like forever ago.
I know.
And there's so much stuff has come since then. There's so many new releases.
Oh, there's Glenn. If anybody knows what is Spring, it's Glenn. Maybe we can just like go play golf or something and let Glenn teach this workshop. That would probably be easier.
Glenn, are you going to be at KCDC? That would be so exciting.
I hope so. That'd be awesome. So this is going to be fun. We're putting together the final touches on that workshop for next week. I'm also doing a talk on what's new in Spring Boot 3. So similar one that I gave to FedEx, only probably a little bit more concise. Yeah. And most importantly, we are going to get some barbecue.
There will be barbecue.
Oh, I cannot wait for barbecue.
There will be barbecue.
The last time I was in Texas for work, I was down there for a customer meeting. We were supposed to go out for barbecue, didn't get any barbecue, and then I panicked and I got barbecue at the airport because I'm like, I gotta have barbecue in Texas, and it wasn't good. I mean, I don't know what I expected. I know.
I'm a little bit biased.
Yeah, I know. Whatever place we went to last year was amazing. So last year was my first time in Kansas City and my first time at KCDC, and it was just a great conference, a whole lot of fun. I just can't wait to be back there.
So for the speakers dinner, we went to barbecue, and then we also went to barbecue at my second favorite place.
Your second favorite place then? Because remember, I missed the speaker dinner last year because of plane malfunctions and weather. Yes. And I didn't get into Kansas City till like 1 a.m. that day. It was terrible. But I made it, so that's a big thing.
Hello, Lucky from Zimbabwe. Thank you for joining. Thomas, thank you so much.
Hey, Thomas. Cool. So that's what's happening there. I think what I'll do now is I'm going to share my screen. We have some things to go through before we get into today's topic. So let me share my screen. The first thing I want to talk about, as I've been doing the last few weeks, is Spring One at VMware Explore. This is happening August 21st through the 24th in Las Vegas. You can go ahead and register now for Spring One. What I want to talk about today is the content agenda has been released. So if you go down here, you can see this button, view agenda. You can actually go through and start to look at all of the sessions that are going to be available at Spring One. So if you don't know, VMware Explorer is going to be kind of this massive conference. Spring One is happening on day 0 of the conference because because we're engineers and we start counting from 0, right? So day 0 is all spring content. And so if you want to check out, all the content that's going to be available there, I can finally, I said on the last show with Nate, we were able to announce our talk. So I'm doing a talk with Nate Shuda on spring recipes. And I'm also able to announce now that I am doing a talk on GraphQL. So Spring for GraphQL, we'll talk about, making the move to GraphQL and why you might want to do that. So I'm excited about that. And I know you have some things going on at Spring One.
I do,
well,
but
DaShaun.
that can wait. I have an announcement to make. Look
Okay.
at this. Thomas, one of our regulars, one of the core members of
nice.
this community, finished his Spring Academy today and got their Spring Professional Certificate.
That's great.
I think that is a great opportunity for us to maybe bring Thomas on the show.
Yeah.
And have him kind of talk about his experience with the Spring Academy. That would be
wonderful. That'd be great.
Thomas, hey, well done.
Yeah, and
well
Thomas,
done.
I just watched Thomas's recording from, I believe, Spring IO, and that was like his first talk ever. I was really impressed with that. So awesome job, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm very, very proud. Very proud. He's wonderful. And I got to meet him in person.
That's awesome.
Yes. So wonderful. Congratulations, Thomas. Spring.academy. Definitely worth it. Take it for a spin and let us know.
Cool.
It's only been up. Spring Academy started this year, right?
Yep.
Started at the beginning of the year. So it hasn't been around for that long. So I think Thomas is a good example of it. It's not one of those things where it takes you a year to study and get your certificate. The Spring Academy works. Get it done. Take it for a spin. Yes. Lots of high fives and congratulations all the way around. Yeah. Hello.
All right. What do you got going on at Spring One? I know you have some things.
I think I'm doing the 15 factors on Kubernetes.
Nice.
And I think I'm actually doing it multiple times. I'm going to kind of look at it from 2 different angles. I think I'm doing it on the Spring One track, and I'm also, there it is. I'm also going to deliver it. Oh, wait. And scaling your Spring Boot app to 0. See, I should probably read the agenda. Yeah, it's going to be fun. So we'll talk about a little bit about that, I think, next week.
Yes.
Some of the stuff scaling to 0.
Cool.
For those of you that haven't been around, I'm a big fan of running on minimal infrastructure, cleaning up behind yourself, keeping that cloud spend as small as possible, and running on Raspberry Pis.
Cool. All right. So that is Spring One. You can check out the agenda, register for it now. August 21st, coming up pretty quick, man. We're a little over 2 months out. Again, we are going to try to plan some things for Spring One, maybe a live session of Spring Office Hours. We're going to do a 5K on the strip somewhere. So we're working on those things. We also might have some, DaShaun and I might be doing some things that we can't talk about yet, but we'll see. We have some exciting things planned for Spring One. I'm excited. Register now.
It's going to be special. Like I can say that. Go, especially if you're part of this community. You'll be well connected to all the secret stuff that we're doing. But go. It'll be fun. We're going to have a good time.
All right, next up, we'd like to take a look at calendar.spring.io. This is your place to kind of find out what's happening as far as releases go in the Spring community. Today, as we're recording this, it is June 13th, 2023. We are looking at this calendar. DaShaun, I know you've done a little homework on the releases here. Do you want to talk through some things that kind of stuck out to you?
So the one of the things about office hours is we want to do a little bit of the work for you. So since May 22nd, I'm going back about these releases. Spring Shell 3.1.0 came out, and it was really just bug fixes. I had a bug or an issue that I created, and I found out, hey, this issue is not going to be in this release. It's going to be in the 3.1.1 release, and that's going to be due on June 22nd. But this whole idea, I've been talking with a lot of customers around the value of getting support on Spring, right? The end of life for 2.7 is coming up in November. If I had commercial support, then my issue that I raised against Spring Shell 3.0, that would have made it into the release. It would have been prioritized into that Spring Shell 3.1.0 release. And now, since I don't have commercial support, now it's a lower priority item, but it's still going to come. It's got that lower priority. And that's a question that I've had a lot of times over the past few weeks. Also, R2DBC for Microsoft SQL Server, 1.0.1 release came out, just new stuff. Spring Cloud Function 4.0.3 was released, and that looks like that was the last component of the Spring Cloud release, 2022.0.3. And there was some breaking changes. So if you were coming from Spring Cloud release 2021.x into 2022, there are some breaking changes. Some things got deprecated, some bad things. So you might want to take a look at those release notes before you make that move. But in that Spring Cloud release, there's lots of releases: Spring Cloud Gateway, Spring Cloud Contract, Spring Cloud Config, Spring Cloud Kubernetes, Spring Cloud Tasks. This is the release train for all those products. One of the questions we had last week was around those common libraries. Spring Cloud Commons 4.0.3 is out there, and that's something that you might want to take a look at for a good example of what kind of things could live or should live in a common library. I've done that a lot over the years. Looked at Spring projects to see how they were set up and how I might want to release my own internal libraries. Spring Cloud Stream, Spring Cloud Build, Spring Cloud Starter Build, Spring Cloud Netflix, all included in that Spring Cloud release. One of the other things that came out was Spring Integration to AWS 3.0. So this is the first V3 release. There's a big changelog. I won't jump into it, but there's a lot of things got released. There was a 2.5 release, 2.5.3 or 4 that was released a few weeks ago. So this is exciting, integrating directly with the AWS services. Spring Juice. This is one that we both saw that was kind of interesting. Spring Juice. Juice, for those of you that don't know, is also an inversion of control container. And I actually had some experience running Spring and Juice in the same artifact or application, capital A application. So this is a tool set for using Spring with Juice and for using Juice with Spring. But I've lived this. I thought it was crazy that we had both of these IOCs in the same project. But this release it's out there, and it's just bug fixes. But yeah, that's a project that I honestly didn't know existed. I don't recommend adding Juice to your Spring project or Spring to your Juice project. This is one of those things. If it's already there, here's a tool set that's going to help. Context propagation. This is a big topic. We've mentioned this with regard to GraphQL in the last few weeks. There's lots of updates. The big thing that I got away from this is the better observability, getting the observability to propagate through things like GraphQL when you are aggregating backend services. So after that release came out, then we have a bunch of observability releases around Micrometer. Micrometer 1.10.8 specifically calls out its upgrade to the context propagation 1.0.3. So tons of new releases. What I was trying to do is there's no other like breaking changes in these things except for the Spring Cloud release. If you were coming from the 2021 release up, those are the only breaking changes I saw. So grab them. If you're using any of those projects that we mentioned, I would love to hear. Throw it in the chat. Let us know. And that's going to help us decide, hey, should we talk more about these releases or not? That's all I've got from the calendar.
Cool. Something sticks out for me on tomorrow, Spring Framework 6.1.0 milestone 1. So that is dropping tomorrow. And there is a bunch of stuff closed in here. We're going to talk about virtual threads later, but compatibility with virtual threads, OpenJDK's Project Loom, with JVM checkpoint restore. So there's a lot that is going to go into 6.1. It's going to be an exciting release. Again, Spring Boot 3.2 will be built on Spring Framework 6.1. So seeing a milestone there, we should see a release candidate later this year, post JDK 21, which is September. So exciting times, as you said earlier, to be a Spring developer.
I'm going to put a little note on some of these questions.
Yeah.
We'll get back to them later, but yeah, definitely ask your questions in the chat.
All right. Some other things I wanted to talk about with around the web. So there's things that I found, whether it was new, mostly I find them through Twitter or just kind of coming across these news items. But I thought they would be good things to kind of talk about really quickly. So GraalVM had a release stream today, in which they kind of announced their new release, and there are some highlights in here for me. So first off, if you haven't seen the GraalVM website in a while, there's been an update here and it really looks nice. There's a whole bunch of things going on. Here's an announcement here. This is now the Oracle GraalVM. So before it was kind of GraalVM, now it is actually the Oracle GraalVM. And Oracle GraalVM is available for JDK 17 and JDK 20, free for use in both development and production. If you want to, you could check out the announcement at graalvm.org. You can also download the new binaries. So if you go in here, there's a nice downloader. You can say, hey, I want to do Java 17 for Mac OS. I can download that. Some highlights of the new release: performance improvements across the board, whether it comes to startup time, memory consumption. You now have the option of picking a new garbage collector. Native image is now included in the binary. So no longer do you have to go out and install that. So that's really exciting, just making everything so much easier. And then they'll be working on, as this got shipped out the door, they're already working on first-class support for things like Project Loom and JDK 21 for the next version. So I was excited to see some of these features drop today. I know you're a big GraalVM fan, DaShaun. Anything stick out for you there?
I actually love GraalVM. I use it a lot. I just ran I like to use SDK Man as well. And I ran a bunch of SDK updates just now to see like, how long is it going to take before I get it into my SDK Man. So I'll stay tuned for.
I'm sure it'll be there pretty quick. It usually hits pretty quick. So
usually it does.
Yeah. Quick. So I will leave a link to the stream if you want to watch that replay. It was really great to kind of see them all talking. They were all really excited about this release, and rightfully so. So I'll leave a link to that stream in the show notes. The next thing I wanted to talk about was this article I came across called Spring Cloud Kubernetes with Spring Boot 3. And this is a really good introduction if you are like a lot of us, not DaShaun included, I'm including me in this, who work in Spring Boot. So maybe you're new to Spring Boot 3, but you use Spring Boot. You've heard of Spring Cloud, you've heard of Kubernetes, but oh my God, how do all these like puzzle pieces fit together? I thought this was a really good introduction. And here it says, the main goal of this article is to update you with the latest version of Spring Cloud Kubernetes project, and really just kind of talking about how to put all of these pieces together. So I'm going to leave a link to this article in the show notes as well. Last but not least, I have this Twitter thread that I found from Alex Yu on ByteByte. So they have ByteByte as this like architecture YouTube channel, and they talk about different, everything architecture. And it's not just Spring related, it's really kind of everything related. And he has this really good breakdown of Netflix's overall architecture. I'm not going to read everything here, but this jumps into like, hey, on the mobile and web side, this is what they're using. On the front end, on the back end. And just some highlights for me are on the front end, communication-wise, they're using a lot of GraphQL. They use a whole bunch of like federated GraphQL APIs there. They rely heavily on Zool, Eureka, Spring Boot, Spring Framework, and others. And there's a really good kind of diagram here, the overall architecture of Netflix. So if you ever thought of something as massive as Netflix, what does that architecture look like? This was a really good kind of intro and a diagram, and you can get a free free system design PDF, 158 pages, by signing up for their newsletter. So By Byte Go's pretty cool if you've never seen them.
Quick peruse of that,
Mhm.
and it's a slightly different way of looking at Netflix from what we saw from Paul Baker on the Golden Path, the spring one. So yeah,
Mhm.
that looks like a really good supplement to what we saw with that presentation.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out, that recording as well. We'll see if we can get that in the show notes because it features more of DaShaun, and that's what we're here to do, is give you more DaShaun. Um, cool. So that's really all I had as the kind of around the web. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
You know what? I do. There's a
Cool.
video I posted on Twitter, but there's a video that is about it's bone and resilience. So it kind of goes outside of spring a little bit, running things in production. What does it mean to be resilient? And it clarified for me the difference between resilience and reliability. And or not clarified, but it changed the way I'm going to be using those terms going forward. I got a really good tip from Andrew Clay Schaefer. There you go. That's it. Thank you.
That's
That's the
it.
video. This
Cool.
DevOps Day Chicago 2020. He's a doctor, and the way he describes resilience, he describes it using this metaphor or archetype of bones. Your bones are constantly being torn down and rebuilt. And if you break a bone, then it gets extra attention based on the signals that it gets. And you kind of map that. I map that to your infrastructure, your Kubernetes cluster. Like, are things working the way that they're supposed to? Tear them down, stand them back up. That's resilience. That practice of being able to do things
Cool.
constantly all the time.
That's awesome. How'd you end up coming across that? Did somebody send that to
I
you?
got that from Andrew Clay Schaefer. I got
Nice.
lucky I get to hang out with him every once in a while.
That's
And
awesome.
we were just having a regular conversation, and he's like, you know what? You need to go find this video. And I was like, you know what? I thought about it for days, and I couldn't find it. I searched. I didn't remember the name that he had added. So I got a note, and he hooked me up, and it was worth it. I
Awesome.
watched it actually twice. I watched it once, kind of let it wash over me, and then I put it back in, and I went for a run and listened to it again. Yeah,
Nice.
it's one of those. It really has changed the way I'm going to be using the words that I use.
That's awesome. Cool. I'll have to check it out. All right. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to our main topic for today,
Let's do it.
which is virtual threads. So, for the folks joining us on a live stream here, I'm going to share a little something. If you are on the podcast, don't worry. We're going to do our best to explain to you what I'm sharing, just because I wanted to include it as talking points, so we make sure that we don't miss anything today. So we're talking about Project Loom, virtual threads. I think before we kind of kick this topic off, oh, I am not sharing my screen, am I? Let's see what's going
You
on.
are, but it's Twitter.
Yeah, I don't know why. Let's fix that. Sorry, I just want to make sure that the folks that are here do get the whole experience. So let me reshare. Sharing our screen, sharing a window. Let's share that one. Okay, so I'm sharing some slides. Again, I gave a presentation on Spring Boot 3 and beyond last week. We'll be doing this again next week at KCDC. Been talking a lot about virtual threads is a hot topic, and it's not just a spring thing, it's a JDK thing, right? And so I figured before we talk about kind of what virtual threads are, DaShaun, maybe we could talk about just just threads in general in Java. So Java, if you don't know, is multi-threaded by default. Mostly in thanks to a class, java.lang.thread. If you don't know, this class is really an abstraction over operating system threads. So your OS has operating system threads. This is how it kind of schedules and handles work within the OS. So really every thread in Java is essentially a wrapper over an OS thread. You often hear these referred to as kind of platform threads as well. Platform threads are expensive. They take a lot of memory. They take a lot of time to create and destroy. So that's where I kind of want to start the conversation. Anything you want to add to that as far as just what threads are in general in Java?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
The thread idea, I think, is a concept that most people understand. And yeah, we had this abstraction around the system threads, and now we're going to keep it inside of the JVM. So when we add a new thread, we're not going to see a new thread when we do PSEF on our system.
Yep. Okay, so with that kind of backstory, let's talk about why we hear the words like Project Loom, virtual threads. What are these things? So it's important to understand that Project Loom is not just virtual threads. Project Loom is kind of a collection of JEPs. We'll talk about JEPs in a second. But if you go to the wiki for Project Loom, it says Project Loom is intended to explore, incubate, and deliver Java VM features and APIs built on top of them for the purpose of supporting easy to use, high throughput, lightweight concurrency, and a new programming model on the Java platform. So Project Loom is this collection, this mission to deliver these easy to use, high throughput, lightweight concurrency apps, right? Project Loom is made up of 3 JEPs right now. I have these 3 JEPs on screen. It could be more, but these are the ones I'm going to highlight. So JEP is a Java enhancement proposal. This is how new features get into the JDK. JEP 425 is about virtual threads, which we'll talk about. JEP 428 is structured concurrency, both of which have been available as a preview since JDK 19. And then JEP 429, which is scoped values, and this was integrated into JDK 20. So I'll leave some links to those JEPs in the show notes. What I love about these JEPs, as they get worked on, they get very detailed. So if you're really interested in understanding the crux of things, like the details, the motivation behind this feature, read through here. These are really great. So that's Project Loom. Project Loom is made up of these different JEPs. And then virtual threads, as DaShaun said, is we're kind of moving away from that abstraction over the OS thread. So virtual threads, again, has been there as a preview since JDK 19. This means if you're writing apps in Java 19 or above, you can use it, but it is a preview feature. So you need to use the --enable -preview. This has been finalized for JDK 21. So we know this is coming in September of 2023 with JDK 21. The important thing is it's no longer linked to an OS thread. So a virtual thread is going to be a lightweight throwaway thread that is tied to kind of the Java thread, but is not tied to the operating system thread. Some important things to note is they use the heap for the stack. So this has potential implications for garbage collection. They have their own scheduler, and they're created for a task and then just allowed to terminate. Like they can just go away. They're lightweight, they're throwaway, and you don't want to pool virtual threads. These are not meant to be pooled because we no longer need to do that. These are lightweight. We can throw them away, get rid of them, do a task, goodbye. And again, not tied to an operating system thread, which is a resource. There is only a finite number of resources when we talk about OS threads. So we're no longer running into like, are we, taking up the entire system? So that's virtual threads. Anything you want to kind of add on top of that?
That last part where the finite resources available to the operating system. I'm sure many of us have run into that where, hey, I didn't have enough threads in order to do the things I needed to do.
Yep.
So we're always faced with these trade-offs, and this is the trade-off. We're going to make that trade for these virtual threads. And you brought up the changes to garbage collection If I'm
Hmm.
creating a bunch of virtual threads, how are those going to get cleaned up and the implications it's going to have on the heap and how garbage
Yep.
collection behaves? Oh, we've also talked about, or I've had this conversation several times. Garbage collection is one of those things that it's not one size fits all.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of options,
Yep.
and you should take it for a spin. Take the
Hmm.
other option for a spin because garbage collection that works on application A might not be the best choice for application B, C, or D.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think for me, I don't know about you, but for me, garbage collection has been one of those like black box magic voodoo things that happen. And somehow the engineers that work on this keep making it better and better. I don't really understand it. And I don't understand how that keeps getting just really, really good. So maybe that's something we can explore in the future. But
In my
it,
head, I put it in the same box as the AOT processing.
yeah,
You have your application. It's running in production.
yeah.
It may or may not get a better performance with a different garbage collector.
Hmm.
And it really depends. If it's just one app, okay, cool. But if you got dozens or thousands of these apps that have, let's say, a 4 gig container, and sometimes, and I've had this case where just changing the garbage collection allows you to change the size of container that you're deploying.
Yeah.
It depends on the workload. Same with
Yeah.
AOT processing. You might get massive benefits by delivering a container that is optimized for that operating system and architecture. But again,
Cool.
you have to try it. There's no like guess. I can't tell you which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. Try it, and it's worth taking it for a spin and trying something else.
Cool.
Revisiting your assumptions.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I want to expand a little bit on your you started talking about, let's talk about it in the context. So that's the virtual threads in the context of the JDK. Like what's a thread? What's a virtual thread? Why do we care as like Spring developers? And I think that just to kind of expand on your point of how do like thread per request models work, I think it's an important thing to understand. So when it comes to thread per request models in the context of, say, a Spring MVC application, it's important to understand where virtual threads are gonna help us as Spring developers. So let's say we build this application and it's written in Java and Spring, and we're using Spring MVC, and we're performing some things that are known as blocking operations. And what is a blocking operation? When I talk to, say, a database, a thread is being used. We are talking to a database. That thread is going to be in use until that operation, that task, has been completed. That is a blocking operation. So there are other blocking operations like, hey, I'm talking to input output stream. I'm talking to another service via HTTP. I'm communicating with some kind of message broker, say through JMS. Those are all things that are blocking in our applications, which means we can't do something else on that thread until that operation has completed. Right. And this is what DaShaun was saying before is the way that works is when a request comes in, a thread is handling that request in Java, right? And now that we know that that is just an abstraction over the operating system thread, really the operating system thread is now blocked because of that blocking operation that's happening. And again, there's a maximum number of concurrent threads that are allowed, right? So when the number of maximum threads has been reached, each subsequent request will need to wait for a thread to be released to fulfill that request. So if you've ever been on a server that can take a whole bunch of traffic, but then you pile a whole bunch more traffic on it and it just falls over, that's one of the reasons, right? Throughput when it can't be handled. So that's really what we're talking about when it comes to thread per request model. Net when we move to, well, and I'll back up a little. So that's how this exists today, right? This is how we're working with. So we have what happens in today's kind of architecture to solve for this problem. We have a couple of ways that we can solve for it, right? One is hardware. You can address it by adding more hardware. You can scale vertically, adding more memory, adding more CPU. You can scale horizontally by adding more servers. You can also solve this problem by writing non-blocking software. And so there's some pros and cons to that. But when it comes to virtual threads, we don't need to, I mean, those are scalability is still going to be a concern, right? But in this particular scenario, when we're talking about a Spring MVC app that talks to blocking operations, no longer are we going to be tying up operating system threads. A virtual thread is going to say, oh, I need to do a task. I'm going to go do it. I'm going to be done, throw it away. Lightweight, fast. We're not blocking an OS thread. So we get this really large pool and of virtual threads instead of this finite resource of platform to OS threads. What I'm really excited about is we can take advantage of this with little to no code changes on your end. So we should see some scalability improvements within your own applications with little to no code changes.
There's another, you know, slice here that I'm thinking about right now is that, hey, when I containerize my Java workloads, and I want to run 10 different containers on this node, on this host. Those, again, operating system threads, like there's only so much that my processor can do. In this way, with this virtual thread, this is going to actually change that noisy neighbor issue a little bit. It's going to isolate it a little bit. So the noisy neighbor problem is going to go away in some cases. As I'm just thinking out loud, but I'm expecting that this is going to be another area where we're going to find some performance improvements. So that idea right there, that's something that I'm excited to explore as I have now just deployed a bunch of Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, so again, this is going to be really great in scenarios for like Spring MVC apps that perform blocking operations. If you're using some type of messaging or cron schedule job where, hey, do this every day, that probably is going to talk to a database or some input output stream. So those are the types of apps that are going to benefit from it. If you're not using MVC, if you're not blocking, if it's purely computational, you're not going to see any benefit. You can still use them, but probably won't see a whole ton of benefit. So the nice thing about this is you can start doing this today. Again, it's a preview feature in 19 and 20. We don't expect a whole lot in performance changes. Like obviously some things might change by 21, but most of what is there is going to be how it's going to work, right? So you can start test driving this today. Now, this is available. So when we talk about like where are we at with this, and I want to talk about Loom in a second, but where are we at with this? Spring Framework 6 has basic compatibility. So as a preview, you be used with virtual thread setup. I have a Tomcat virtual thread HTTP example on my YouTube channel on how to like quickly create a new bean and use virtual threads in your Spring MVC apps. Going forward, hopefully we're going to have first class support in Spring Framework 6.1, Spring Boot 3.2. So that's exciting. The other thing I want to bring up is we got a question here, and I knew we would get this, so I wanted to.
We always do.
Yep. Where is?
Yeah, that was the one.
All right.
The first one.
So I got a question here. Do you guys think that Project Loom will kill the reactive paradigm? So as I said, there are some ways to. Let me just grab my thing. We talked about the thread per request model today, and some ways to basically scale your applications. One of which is through reactive programming, right? Instead of performing these blocking operations, reactive programming gives you the ability to say, go do this. I'm going to go away and release that thread. Tell me when you're done with it, and then we can handle the response, right? So that's one thing that reactive programming does. Does this kill that? No, because there are other things that the reactive programming model does, especially when it comes to Spring Webflux. When you're working on something like stream-based processing and you're working with back pressure, this is something that you'll still want to reach for Spring Webflux for. Also, one of the JEPs that we talked about earlier was structured concurrency. That is not going to be in JDK 21. This is something that Spring Webflux also addresses. So Spring Web Flux still very much has a place in this story. Now, if you are going forward and Project Loom works for you, if all you reach for reactive programming for is to improve scalability of your web applications, then maybe this is something that you can look at. And this is something you can start kicking the tires on. So, does it replace that one thing that you reached for reactive programming for? Maybe. Does it replace everything? No. And it just, there are some pros and cons to each probably. It just provides a different scalability mechanism. But I would still say that there's a place for Webflux. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, if you're already doing reactive, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of benefit by undoing it. We talked about the R2DBC driver for MS SQL. It's a reactive driver, right? If you've got blocking drivers, then there are differences. There are trade-offs that you're going to make in these different paradigms. And Solitary Turian actually, I think, gave a really good answer. There are categories of applications which benefit from the reactive programming model. I don't think it will die with the introduction of virtual threads.
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah. So yeah, there's just different paradigms.
Yep. So we got another question here. So we expect Tomcat and Spring Boot embedded Tomcat to switch to virtual threads internally in future versions. So I don't know that switch completely. What you have to do today, and again, I did a video on this. If you want to take advantage of virtual threads in a Spring MVC app, you need to define a new bean that basically tells Tomcat under the hood to now use the virtual thread executor, right? So to me, that seems like more of a configuration thing. So I don't know what the answer to this is. Somebody on the Spring team may be able to jump in and say so, and I don't know that they know yet. But as this would to me be through a configuration. So I would go into my Spring MVC app and I would configure and say, hey, I want to use virtual threads, which would in turn underneath the hood tell Tomcat or whatever servlet container you're using, hey, go ahead and switch to the virtual thread based executor. So I expect it to be, like I said, little to no code changes on your end, and then probably just a configuration change in your MVC app to say, take advantage of virtual threads. So a little comment from Thomas here. Reactive makes debugging harder. Haha. I didn't hear much good arguments for reactive yet. You didn't, but I think we pointed them out. Again, if you're doing streams-based processing, large amounts of data, working with back pressure, this is going to help out a lot still.
I was searching, trying to find, I don't know exact, but in my head, I feel like the Tomcat is going to switch to using virtual threads by default. Oh, wait. Here we go. Anbu says Tomcat 10.1.10 added support for virtual threads. I think it'll be the default in some upcoming version, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, you can.
So I would have to, sometimes when I watch these talks too, they're by very smart people. When I watch talks, I consume what I can consume, and I can't consume everything at once. Yeah. Mark Thomas, who is a committer on the Apache Tomcat project, did a talk at Spring IO, and that's where I learned a lot of my stuff. My knowledge from was Mark Thomas. Yep. His talk at Spring IO. You can watch it on YouTube. I would go back and watch that. He probably mentions something along those lines, but like I said, I only could take what I got in that first 2 passes, I think, that I've watched it. So check out his talk and maybe we can learn a little bit more about that there. So cool. That's exciting. I think there probably is something else to mention. So when we talk about virtual threads, like what has changed in the Spring framework? What might have to change in your code? Again, Mark does a really great job of explaining that. So maybe go watch his talk on this, but there are some situations that you might run into where some code might have to change. So that's something just to think of, but in most cases, it should be little to no code changes, which makes this, for me, a win-win. And I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. So did you want to
And
do a demo today?
no, I don't think so. And
Okay.
again,
Time check.
because we're in the podcast world now, I don't think
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. But if we want to do something maybe on some on a live stream somewhere else, that's not the podcast,
Yep.
then yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, in that case, let me go back to some of these other questions that were asked.
All right.
Stig says, I'm trying to create a POC on policy-based access management using Open Policy Agent. I've created a simple Spring API and trying to have Spring security working with OPA. Have you tried this previously?
I have not.
I
I don't
believe
know.
I do have an example of using Open Policy Agent with a Spring Boot app using Spring Security. And I think I will have to pull that up. I know that we have one somewhere in one of the guides. So Stig, I will try to find that, and I'll push that out onto Twitter. I'll ask my friends, and we'll get you one of those. Good question. Open Policy Agent. When I first heard about Open Policy Agent, it was new and exciting, and I was running into a lot of corner cases immediately. But now it seems to have some legs. I think it's going to be around for a little while. A good question. Alexander says, hey guys, I'm doing a POC on Spring Reactor. We have a thread that does some processing. We want to decouple that by using Reactor syncs and flux. All of that works fine, but exceptions are causing issues.
That's the
If
very definition of an exception.
if in the middle of the stream processing there is a failure, the whole processing stops. On error continue and other options do not work. Any ideas? Alexander, I think this is one where I'm going to need a little more. I have not run into that type of problem. It seems like our control loop is capturing the errors where you don't want it to. You want to kind of continue error and continue, but it's stopping in that case. I've not run into that. So Alexander, we've jumped on streams before. We've jumped on a Zoom before. I think I might ask you to do the same thing. Is either give me an example repo or reach out and we'll do a Zoom and we'll jump into it. So I don't have all the answers. I've not run into this, but maybe we can talk through it and figure it out. I think those are all the ones that I had
Cool.
starred. We
right.
got back to Sandro's, and look at this. Yes, we can definitely pair up. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, if we have no other questions, I think we're coming up against the hour anyways. We'll kind of call it there. If you have questions, you can always join us on the live stream as everyone here did today and ask your questions every Tuesday at 3:30 Eastern time on the Spring Developer channel, with exceptions on travel weeks. Like next week, we are going to be traveling. So we're probably going to schedule a stream. If I think, DaShaun, you've already scheduled one for next Monday, which
Did I
now that I
schedule it
think
for next
about,
Monday? I think I did it for next Tuesday, and I think I need to
okay.
fix that.
And I think we need to fix that anyway, because next Monday is a holiday here at VMware, Juneteenth. So we we'll talk about it.
Okay.
So we have another great episode coming up on scaling to zero. I'm excited about that one. I'm excited about KCDC. Also, if you want to go ahead and check out the archives, go ahead and head over to springofficehours.io. You can ask your questions there. If you can't join us on a live stream, that's a great place to ask a question. We'll see if we can't get to those during a live broadcast. And this is a place where you can check out the past archives. So with that, I think we will go ahead and call it. DaShaun, I hope you have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Oh, you got one more.
One last thing. No,
one last thing. Oh, one last thing. You're right. Kind of a little segment for us to be able to kind of add just one more thing. Funny enough, I was telling some people about this last week. I got a message on Twitter that asked me if I quit YouTube. This is because I had not posted a video in 2 weeks. So apparently 2 weeks is the threshold that you guys have.
We start to worry.
Me.
We just worry about you. We care.
Okay. Oh, it was you. Was it you anonymously? So I'm just gonna go ahead and pimp my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@DanVega. I put up a new video this week. I have another one coming out later this week. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you got.
YouTube.com
DaShaun.
@DaShaun, DASHAUN. I have a YouTube channel as well. I'm only about 1,000 times smaller viewership than Dan, but I'm, baby steps. Baby steps.
Start somewhere.
But Solitary Turian asked this question: does anybody know if Project Layden will be standardizing native images, building native images like Raw VM does, or some other ways which JVM will be at the bottom of it? So you should really join in next week. I'm going to talk about scaling to zero, and I will talk about the differences of native images and things like crack, the check or consolidated restore at checkpoint.
There you go.
Which does have the JVM at the bottom of it. And the whole idea, Project Layden kind of gives you this balance between what you want to do, balance the just-in-time versus the AOT. And instead of just having one or the other, you can kind of choose where you want to be. So that's, I think, the goal, the best I know of it. But yeah, you should definitely tune in next week.
Great. Tune in next week. Also, can't wait to see some of you next week. I know Jitter Ted, our friend Ted, will be in Kansas City. Can't wait to see some of you. DaShaun, thanks again as always. And thank you for everyone for showing up to the live stream. And we will see you in the next one.
Thanks.
Later.